Hey there, it's Brooks with Grace Cart, and in this episode, we're going to talk about the three most common mistakes we see people make when choosing their processing partnership. So this is arguably the most important partnership you'll make in your direct marketing business because it's the direct link between you and your customer. You can't exist without your processor, and the right processor is going to enable you to grow where the wrong processor can absolutely break your business. And we're going to talk more about that in this episode. As always, I'm joined by my brother Blaine, CEO of Seven Sons, and together we're going to share our experience of working with over dozens of processors and some of the questions that we've learned that have helped us be able to have more confidence to vet new processors and ensure that they're going to be a good fit for us and our customers. So if that sounds interesting, let's dive in. You're listening to Grace Cast, a show that shares the secrets to selling perishable food products online. The show and advice is brought to you by the team at Seven Sons, which is an 8-figure e-commerce business that started completely from scratch. Each episode, we bring you one topic, 3 strategies, and one tangible resource to continue your learning and put you on the fast track in your own e-commerce journey. Let's begin. You're only as strong as your weakest link. That's a quote from an unknown source, and it's a great way to start this episode because we're talking about processing, and your processing partnership is often that link between you and your customer. And if that's the weakest link in your operation, then that can be a problem.
And too often, Brooks, it is one of the weakest links. I mean, we need to think of the processing facility. That is the central hinge. If you're a farm that's direct marketing, it's the hinge of your business. It's the other half of your business.
Yep.
And I think too often we don't put enough intention and understand what's all at stake when we don't get it right.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot at stake. We've spent, the first 10 years, Brooks, that we were in business, we were jumping from one process to the next. And the stories that we can tell, the amount of stress and the customers we lost because of some of the problems we experienced from one process to the next was, it was.
I feel like the experience of having horror stories working with processors is almost like a rite of passage to direct marketing because everyone has it. Yeah. You talk to anyone who's been doing this for very long, they have their horror stories and the hard lessons learned.
Yeah.
And so I think anyone who's listening, who's been direct marketing for very long, understands how important this relationship is. The unfortunate part of that is that we usually learn that through hard lessons learned and experience of things going wrong.
So in today's episode, I'm going to go through the top 3 mistakes that we made and that we see other farms making all the time when it comes to choosing their processor. So leave you with some real practical criteria that you need to think through when choosing your processor. But bottom line is you don't know until you try it, and you have to be willing to say, all right, we got to cut ties and we got to move on because it takes a process, and you don't know until you use that processor.
Yep.
So, Brooks, I can think of times when, we went to all this work to come up with like a sugar-free, nitrate-free recipe for our products, and we're all excited about it. We promote, do some pre-launch content to the customers. And I know with one product we recently did, the product came back from the processor, and we were told they used the correct recipe and ingredients, but the label still had all the old ingredients listed on it. And in their mind, it's like, well, just tell your customer that, we labeled it wrong.
It doesn't have sugar.
Do that.
Even though it's in the
Even though it
ingredients.
says on the ingredients it doesn't have sugar. No, it doesn't have sugar. So, one thing after another. I remember one time we had a lot of product that came back from a brand new processor, and their trimming, they left so much gristle, and inedible attached to the cuts. Mm-hmm. And I remember calling the processor and said, hey, appreciate you guys working us in, but here's what, there's too much gristle. And the guy on the phone, the butcher, replies, what's gristle? He knew what gristle was, and that's just it's just
that's butcher mentality.
Yeah, it's butcher mentality, and they know that they're in demand. So, anyways, it's a big deal. We need to get it right.
Well, and what's even more important about all of this is that and what makes this relationship so important is because it's not just about those mistakes that can happen along the way, but it's about finding a processor who has enough of a streamlined system, a training program for new people who come through that you're going to get a consistent product again and again, because it's not only just if something goes wrong, yes, that's bad experience for your consumers, but even inconsistencies, if necessarily something isn't done correctly the right way, that inconsistency can be very confusing to your customers, where they perceive that there's a problem just because it's different than what it was before.
Yes, and that's where you can get into trouble using two different or multiple processors,
Correct.
which was the boat we were in at one time, because we were scaling, trying to grow our business. Not one single processor at that time could handle what we were doing. So using multiple processors is actually, that can be a real problem when it comes to quality consistency and your feedback loop. You're maintaining so many different relationships, so many different feedback chains to the right people, and it makes quality control a nightmare. And operationalizing your business, for receiving product back here, everyone uses a different box size, different case counts, different types of labels. And so the goal here, and what we finally, after 10 years of this, found our processor of our dreams. And they've been an incredible, they're the other half of our business. They really are. So anyways, we want to just jump right into the three most common mistakes that I see and that we made.
What's mistake number one?
Number one is putting way too big of a priority on how close my processor is to my farm or my business, and what the pricing is like. So trying to decide, well, I hear this from farms all the time, and we did the same thing. I use this because they're close and they have reasonable prices. And that should be the very last criteria when you're choosing a processor. That was our number one mistake. We weren't willing to think outside of a 40, 50 mile radius of our farm. And so we're using processors that were in that proximity. When we finally widened that to closer to a 200 mile radius, that got us into there were options that were far better at that point. And we just couldn't get over the idea of going that far to a processor.
And I feel like this is such a common mistake, because when you first start out, everyone's looking for, okay, how do I differentiate from the other guy? Thinking that there's so much competition out there and you have to have some sort of way to differentiate. And the easiest, and I think it's kind of the lazy way to differentiate, is to say, well, I'm just going to be priced a little lower, and knowing that that's thinking that that's going to be a consumer driver for you, which pricing is not always going to get you the awareness that you think it will, and the conversions that you think it will, when it comes to growing a direct marketing business.
There's no comparison to finding the right processor. We talk about this when we're hiring people, and that's really, I'm going to talk about this in a second, that's really what you're doing. You are hiring. Think of this when you're choosing a processing partner. Think of this as like hiring. This is your top key hire in your business. The level of trust you need to have, the level of integrity that person needs to have. So you can't put a price on it. You will always be better off, no matter what the price is, with the right processor or whatever the distance is.
Competing on price is always going to be a challenge. You want to compete on service and quality. And that's the difference of finding the right processor. It might cost more, but then you're competing on quality and service. And that's what brings you a loyal customer base.
Yes. And what I love about our processing partner, Brooks, they're smart, and they recognize that within their niche industry of being a smaller, mid-sized processor, they know that service and quality are the missing
ingredients.
Missing ingredients that almost all their competitors won't focus on, and so they zero in on service, and it gets them all the business. They've been growing every year since we've worked with them. Just a well-run operation. They get the marketplace gaps in their business.
That's a true example of how competing with price isn't always the best option. They're seeing growth year after year after year. It's been awesome watching them after. I don't know, how many years have we been working with them at this point? 6 or 7?
No, 10. I'm pretty sure close to 10 now. So it's been, and I know that when we made the switch to that processor, our business exploded. And that brings me to my second point is the second mistake that I see folks making is not putting a big enough priority on the capabilities that the processor offers. So when I think of capabilities, I think of level of inspection for one thing, because that's what allowed our business to explode. We went from a state processing level to a USDA processing level that expanded us into Chicago, and just doing that immediately really grew our business. But I see farms that are using custom exempt processors, so you have to sell by the hanging weight or by the whole animal. That just creates, it limits your growth, it limits what you can do with your business. And that's an unnecessary limit that you need to avoid. Obviously, packaging capabilities is going to determine certain customers you can sell to, how you can sell and ship your products. So packaging is important. The gold standard for packaging is finding a processor that does roll stock packaging, because that's what's going to hold up longest in the freezer. It's the best presentation for the customer, and obviously it's going to work for a customer that wants fresh products. I know one of our largest wholesale customers, Brooks, institutional buyer, they want us to slack the ground beef before it arrives.
Yep.
So they're okay with it being frozen, but they want it to slack. Well, if you're using butcher wrap or paper, obviously those are not options.
Yeah, I think if you're a seasonal business as well, package integrity is a big deal, and the presentation over time is a big deal. So if you're storing product inside your freezer for 6 months to a year or more than that, some of that shrink wrap packaging or even, butcher paper, it's not going to have the integrity and the visual appeal to it.
Or sometimes the worst is the traditional vacuum packaging. Those will lose their seal over time. Every month that goes by, more and more items end up losing their seal, where this roll stock, it looks like vacuum, but it's an entirely different process, and it really holds up well in the freezer. Obviously, custom labeling abilities, that brand, I've looked at it before, Brooks, when I think about all the different packages that go out to our 10,000 customers, and those packages live in their freezers and their refrigerators. The brand impressions are in the millions every year. So being able to get a custom label on that package is a big deal.
Which is especially important if you're doing any sort of wholesale to retailers as well, because if you're selling to a retailer, you want that label. It's the only thing that you can use to communicate your story. They're not finding you online or anything like that. So that label, that needs to be like a business card for you.
Yes. Exactly. Yep. Don't underestimate, even when you're small, the brand impression. And it's just a reminder, again, you're branding your business for the confidence that you give your customers. And they associate your name and your brand with the confidence that they can be confident in the food they eat. And so when they open that package each time and they see just even your logo, it reminds them of that trust that they have in you. So it's really important for even long-term customer loyalty. Speaking of labels, Brooks, here's what I'm going to say real quick. This is kind of a rabbit trail. Don't let the fact that you have a custom label set up with a processor, and maybe you have an inventory of a couple $1,000s worth of labels that you paid for, don't let that be your inhibitor to moving to the next processor. I can't tell you how many cases of labels that we've had to discard because, we made a bad call. That wasn't the right processor. Don't let that. Your first loss is always better than your second loss. We'd say that all the time. Other things like casing abilities, Brooks. I know with all the processors we used in the past, all the product always came back in like these long, flat boxes that you couldn't hold. Because they were meant for the freezer shelves, and they were jumbled. You had roast steaks, ground beef, all in the same box. So there was no consistency. Now the processor we use, for one thing, it's our custom box size. It's all set up for the pallets we need, the shelving we need. It's good and sturdy. And it's all uniform case. So there's 24 steaks in every box, and they're the same steak in every box. 8 roast. Everything's uniform, so it saves so much time and money on our end as we're receiving it.
And this is so important. I want to make sure that I double down on this, because I actually wrote this down as a note, not knowing where you're going and if you're going to mention this. But this is so key, because when you think about, again, looking at trying to find a processor that's the lowest cost option, this is where someone who's a little bit more expensive, but they differentiate with service, this pays for itself, especially as you begin to grow. I can't tell you how many. Just had a conversation the other day with someone who was wanting to consider Grace Cart, and a lot of their challenges they have right now is with inventory. And there's only so much that technology can help solve. Your processor is a huge part of when it comes to streamlining your inventory process, because they weren't getting consistent case size back. So they were like, well, how do we input this online? Because we're gonna have to count everything. That sounds like a huge hassle. Yeah, and it is, and it's gonna take your time, which again is gonna cost you money. And inventory management, being able to get everything in consistent case counts. It comes back from the processor, and we're checking in a pallet. We're just counting, the cases.
Well, not only that, our processor uploads the live inventory to a Google spreadsheet. So they show, okay, here's a column, and the column represents every pallet. And it has exactly the number of cases and items on that pallet, and we just check it in when it comes back.
It makes the receiving easier. It makes it, when we have to do, an inventory cycle count to make sure we verify what we have on hand, we do that every single month. It makes that process so much easier. Plus, again, we're using our own custom boxes. So we get to make those boxes set up for exactly what we need to easily store product inside the freezer, easily store product on pallets. This will pay for itself.
Well, speaking of storage, so our processor, knowing again, our processor does such a good job at knowing the gaps in their marketplace, and they knew that service was a gap. They also knew that freezer storage was a gap. So they built this gigantic walk-in freezer or drive-in freezer, palletized drive-in freezer, and that's a service they offer. Is you don't have to pick up your product immediately. They have this, they have aggregation options so that we can send a semi truck there and pick up a whole load that we do sometimes, and that really saves efficiency on our end. So
this plays back into your customer experience too, because I know people who aren't getting consistent case counts back, so that means they're just guessing kind of how much inventory they have. They have someone who it mostly lives in their head, but then that's prone to all sorts of inventory inaccuracy errors. You oversell on products, so that creates a poor customer experience.
And it's a mess to ever do a monthly or weekly inventory or cycle counts because everything's jumbled up. It's a mess. So there's so much that goes into this. Even having a processor with a dock, so you can hire a third-party trucking company, go and pick it up, especially if you're a little further away from your processor.
Right.
So, all right. So the third mistake. So number one was putting too much priority on distance and price. Number two was not prioritizing the capabilities, because that again just affects not only your customer but your business operations. Number three is not considering the people. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you need to think about this as this is your most important hire that you'll ever make in your business. So the level of trust and the integrity of the people that work and own and run that processor is absolutely imperative. So I would say treat it like hiring. Ask for references when you're looking at a processor. Ask them, can I talk to clients that maybe are similar to me or similar in size, and ask them about their experience. And when you talk to them, for one thing, if they're not willing to share that, then that's a flag immediately. But if they do share that, when you're asking other farms how their experience has been with the processor, make sure to ask how have they handled a mistake that they made when processing your product. Like, did they make it right? How did that go? So that's one of the most important questions I would ask other folks. So, and this is really important, Brooks. I mean, because we've actually been through a Class 1 recall where the Seven Sons label and name, it was on television and and news, like, hey, there's a big recall, and we were part of a couple brands that had a recall. But I just know through that kind of really scary month period that we were dealing with that. The people that we're working with, our processing partner, was they're so on the ball, and they stepped us through it, and we didn't skip a beat. And and it was a labeling issue, is what it was. It had nothing to do with the product quality or the processing quality. So make sure you consider the people. If it's not someone you would hire in your own business, I would say don't hire them as your processing partner. So those are my top three, Brooks. And a final thought is, I mentioned this earlier, is avoiding the whole thing of having multiple processors that are doing the same thing. So it's okay. We do work with multiple processors, but it's because they're doing value-added things. So we have a processor that does some jerky products for us, some other ones that do some sausages and hot dogs, and that's okay. It'd be nice if it was all under one roof.
Right.
But having two different processors, because one does USDA, one does state inspected. That's just unnecessary complexity.
I think a good defining line there is you don't want two different processors who are processing the same product for you. That's where you're going to run into is inconsistencies, even just inconsistency in packaging from one to the other, and customers are getting that. It's going to cause questions, and again, your customer wants high quality product. They want it to be consistent. And that's going to be key by finding a strong processing partnership. That's your main processing partnership.
And one of the other final points, Brooks, is really part of the goal of this episode is to help everyone raise the bar for what's possible and what can be expected. It can be better. And it starts there in our minds. If we talk about the idea of denying our helplessness all the time. It's so easy to get in that processor is just there's not
Yeah,
enough
and
of
that's
them.
just the way it is with this industry. So that's
Yeah.
what you tell your
It does
customers.
not have
Sorry,
to be
I don't
this
have
way.
control.
It
Yep.
does not have to be the way you tell yourself that.
Yep.
Expand your radius. Be willing to maybe process more animals at one time, so you're not driving as much to the processor and consolidating some of the logistics. For us, that meant getting bigger freezers so that we can take more animals at one time, bring more back at one time. It did mean changing our business, but that was a small cost in the comparison of the value that got us, and it set us up for success long term and to retain our customers and to create more profit because, of course, we're working with a processor that cares about service. They're doing more cuts for us. They're doing value-added products like our bacon-infused burgers, which is one of our most profitable items that we have and liked by our customers. So
processors, it can feel like a necessary evil, but if you find the right partnership, this is actually going to be a partnership that influences and inspires growth in your business.
it's a growth lever. Exactly.
Yep.